Rasulullah said that there's an organ in the body. إِذَا صَلُحَتْ صَلُحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. The heart, right? There's an organ in the body. When it's sound, the whole body is sound. The whole self is sound. When it's not sound, the whole body is sick. So this idea of the heart, the spiritual heart, right? That Imam al-Ghazali talks about and other scholars talk about, spiritual heart. That this is the control center. This is the control center of the heart, the control center itself. So there are two options here. If the heart is dead, it has zero control on the self, and the self runs like a child, or as some scholars call it, like a beast. And for those who have 2-year-old children, you know exactly the difference. Sometimes it's very hard. All right? There's something missing. The heart is dead, it just goes wild. It goes wild on the physical side, and sometimes it goes wild on the spiritual side. It does things like committing shirk, does things like tries to fulfill its spiritual needs in ways that is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to be. So the heart is dead. But sometimes the heart is alive, but it's very weak. And it sometimes wins and sometimes loses. All right? Again, as parents, we know it, right? Sometimes we win some battles and sometimes we lose the war, right? It's like, no lollipop, no TV. And then 2 hours later, okay, fine, just have as much lollipop as you want. Just leave me alone, trying to sleep. All right? Sometimes, if the heart is weak, sometimes it can control the self, but sometimes the self overpowers. And again, this is where sometimes we feel people find challenging, where we're still wavering, we're still trying to figure out what's the best version. However, if the heart is strong, if the heart is firm, if the heart is sound, if the heart is not diseased, it is able to direct the self towards the best version of itself. Does this make sense? Now, the heart, though, can't work on its own. It has influences. What are the influences of the heart? What influences the heart? Because the heart gets influenced all the time. Every single time, good and bad comes into the heart. How does the heart, what are the influences over the heart? Second? Shaitan is one of them. Excellent. I'm glad this is the first time someone mentions shaitan as the first thing. Usually like the last thing we think about. And you know, I do some of this corporate training, and when I do like shaitan, look, don't talk about shaitan in the workplace. Look, what, like is he waiting in the work parking lot outside? You know, it's like, it's within you. Why not? Why not talk about the biggest influence on the heart? The shaitan is our number one enemy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared it as our enemy. And again, once someone said the biggest trick of shaitan is making us feel that he's not there. That's the biggest trick. We don't talk about shaitan enough. The influence of shaitan, the influence in our lives, in our work, in our families, in our children. Just being aware, like, wait a second, am I being influenced by shaitan, right? And it's not in that spooky doopy, you know, oh my God, is shaitan gonna eat me up? No, I'm saying the general, the stuff that you do every single day, and how you think, wow, is shaitan influencing me? And always be on the guard, doing your adhkar, saying Bismillah, all those things, always being on the guard, because you want to protect your heart from one of these influence. But what else influences the heart? Right.
There's a thing known as the avenues that lead to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
What you see, what you hear.
The senses, yes. The senses also influences the heart. Excellent. What else? So this side, yep.
Your nafs.
Your nafs is there. So what else influences the heart? So we'll talk about intellect in a minute. We'll put that aside. We'll put it aside. But another thing. Excellent. The environment. Right? The environment. Remember the story of the man who killed 99 people? He killed 99 people, and then what happened? They went to the abid and says, will Allah forgive me? The guy said, no chance. And he killed him. So it was 100 people. They went to a scholar, and the scholar said, yes, but you need to move to a new town, because your land is ard su. Imagine someone living in an area where there's all gangs and all difficult. It's very difficult to be at your best if the environment just does not help your heart get clean. So changing the environment, moving away with the environment, that is a way for you to protect your heart. All right, so that's another thing about environment. Okay, good. Also, another thing to add here is words and actions. What you say, what you do, as well as what others say and what others do. When you say words hurt, right? If someone says something, it kills your heart sometimes. Words and actions. Now, intellect is an interesting thing. Intellect is considered, so Imam Ghazali talks about the heart being like the king, right? And the intellect is like the advisor. Now, the intellect gives advice based on logical reasoning. You know, it weighs pros and cons, logic says, yes, no, you should do it. But sometimes the intellect gives logical reasoning which may not be at the best interest of the heart or the nafs. Give me an example of that, where the intellect gives you a very logical reasoning which may not be at the best interest of the heart or the nafs.
Because maybe your mind is not like, maybe it's state of mind.
So maybe preserving sleep for not waking up at tahajjud sleep.
Excellent example. All right, so imagine this. You put this alarm for, let's say, 4 a.m. to wake up at tahajjud. Your brain, your intellect says, Muhammad, tomorrow you've got work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and logically speaking, you only slept 6 hours, and therefore you should rest more because you need more rest, otherwise you cannot function to the day tomorrow's work, right? Logic, very simple, A plus. Now, sometimes the heart is weak, goes, yeah, it's true, I should sleep, yeah, good advice. And then shaitan comes, or mufti shaitan comes, it's okay, wait till sunrise, just before sunrise and you'll be fine, right? So the heart is, if his heart is weak, is all right, fine, whatever. And then therefore tells the nafs, just enjoy yourself. Now, sometimes intellect gives advice, and the heart, again, the heart is where the wahi comes, the heart is where that iman comes, that faith comes, says, no. I might intellectually understand what you're saying, but the heart's saying on a spiritual level, because the divine knowledge enters the heart, says, I know I should get up, even though it might not logically make sense. Classic example, Ramadan. Go to non-Muslim friends and tell them, what? Oh yeah, we don't eat or drink from like dawn till sunset, and after sunset we go and spend hours in the masjid. And everyone's like, you guys are crazy. You're like, literally, I heard like, you guys are crazy. Like, why would you do that? It does not make logical sense. But the heart knows that's what's best for it, because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. So the intellect there is where it's an advisor. Sometimes you take his advice, but sometimes you check it against what does the heart wants it to do. Now, why is this important? Because, and this is the difference between Western psychology and Islamic psycho-spiritual psychology. Western psychology is very reason, logic based. The idea of reason, the mind, the intellect is at the center of Western psychology, and therefore everything is built around this idea that intellect is king. But in Islam, the spiritual heart is the king, and that's why in sujood, the mind is lower than the heart. When we make sujood, where's the head? It's on the floor, and the heart is higher. The mind submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The mind submits to the divine knowledge. It even does not make sense. Sometimes like, why would you do that? Right? It does not make sense. This is where the heart steps in with the mind. Like, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe in the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I accept that. Now, again, why we're saying this is this. If the heart is not strong enough, if the heart is not able to say, I submit, I am a abd, a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I use the word slave, not servant. Why? Why do you use the word slave, not servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Servant has a choice. Servant can say, yeah, I've got holidays today. I need a weekend off. A slave has no choice. From the moment they wake up until they sleep, they are slaves. They are slave to who? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here's the interesting thing. If you are not a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we've been created as slaves. What happens when we're not slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You're slave to your nafs, and sometimes we're slave to something or someone else. Slave to money, slave to fame, slave to how many Instagram likes I get. Right? We become slave to something else. Something else becomes our driver. So the idea of being an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the heart submits and says, I am a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be able to filter all the stuff, all the influences, the environment, the words and actions, the intellect, the senses, and shaitan saying, I'm an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore I'm able to act according to the divine knowledge Allah has given me, and be able to control the self and live the best version of myself. Does this make sense? Too heavy in the morning? You good? Any questions? Can someone explain this again to me? Bismillah.
How would you define soul?
Okay, so the idea of soul is here, the ruh, right? Is the ruh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when a ruh enters the body, That's where the nafs is created, right? Now some people call ruh as spirit, some people call they interchange. There's a lot of, that's why sometimes the word spirit and soul can use interchangeably. Some people call the self the spirit and the ruh as the soul. Some people call this is the soul, this, and then this is the spirit. So the English language is not, unfortunately, not very accurate and very difficult to define. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm saying there's a soul, there's a ruh, there's something that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which enters the body and creates a nafs. Okay? Now, so when someone asks you, what does it mean to be the best version of yourself, what should be your one-line response? To be a abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I am a abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and the reason why this is powerful, because the moment you recognize, oh, I have a master who watches over me, who gives me everything I have, who takes care of me, who will hold me to accountable, and I'm a slave. From the moment you wake up till you sleep, you're always conscious of this fact. You're always conscious that, wait a second, I'm a slave, and what does my master want me to do now? And if you act constantly on this front, on this idea, what does my master want me from me now? That's how you develop yourself. That's how you make those smart choices between your physical needs, your spiritual needs. That's how you start, improving the heart. That's how you live that best version of yourself. Now here's the challenge. We don't live in a vacuum. We live with other selves. And this is why being the best version of yourself is not only about me, myself, and I. By saying, I need to work on this, be best version of myself, but also recognize that every single person around me is on their own journey. Some people who have achieved this level of status of being an abd, which is the highest status. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described his prophet as Abdullah wa Rasuluh. Some people are still struggling by attaching themselves to these social constructs. And this is their whole identity. And if you take this away, they have nothing to hold on to. Right? Yesterday we spoke about the idea of workism, the idea your work becomes your identity to the point if you lose your job, you feel like there's nothing else out there for you. Yourself is attached to your identity. So the idea of that you are not alone. Each one of us is a self, and each one of us is on a different journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And recognizing that is part of living the best version of yourself socially. So you live the best version of yourself spiritually, you live the best version of yourself physically, but socially recognizing that some people are up and down, and some people have different issues. I need to be aware of that and build on inshallah. Are we good? Any questions? Okay. Let me just put this on. All right. So the best, like I said, the best version of yourself, is to be a abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the challenge now is think about the self. So let's go to summary. So self is made of a body and soul. It is also, like I said, Bismillah. It is also has two sides, a physical side and a spiritual side. The heart commands the self if it's alive. Otherwise, the heart has no command of itself. But this heart is influenced. One thing we didn't mention is influenced by knowledge. Again, good knowledge and bad knowledge. Sometimes the heart gets corrupted with bad knowledge. Knowledge that takes away from being an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes it gets increased by good knowledge. And that's why just being in this workshop, that's why Muhammad mentioned about reading is part of development knowledge. So the heart at least is able to deal with the nafs. The environment, being very conscious. What's in your environment? Think about your environment. It's not just the people. It's not just your country. It's not just the home you live in. What else plays in your environment? What plays in your environment that affects the heart? Your thoughts, in a way, but also things that you listen, right? Your friends, things like your social media, things like the radio, what you watch, the TV. These are all part of your environment. So being very conscious of your environment, and how is my environment helping me become close to be an abd, or does it help me just not be an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Shaitan, of course, the biggest aspect, the biggest impact of the heart has on the heart if we don't take the precautions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. Experiences as well. Experiences. That's why sometimes you might have the knowledge, you might have the right environment, you might be protected from shaitan, but some of the experiences can play a role. Experience as well can a role. Now, sometimes these advice, all these sort of influences gets filtered through the brain's advice, right? The brain says, all right, I know that, you're learning this, and the mind is trying to decipher. The mind is trying to be intellectual, trying to be reasoning. And somebody got to filter this. Wait, does this make sense? Not only from a logical perspective, but from a spiritual perspective as well. I think I had a conversation early on with a sister here saying about reading the self-help books. I'm saying there's nothing wrong with the self-help books. There's something very beneficial, but be very conscious of their worldview. Right? You're talking about people who don't believe in an akhirah, who don't believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who don't believe in a final message. So they have a particular worldview. So have faith-based critical reading skills. Meaning if you're reading self-help books, it's fine, read them, but be very conscious. Ask questions. Say, how is this aligned with our faith? How is it aligned with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us?